What's going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today we're going to be talking everything barefoot shoes. So I've received a ton of questions on all of my barefoot shoe content and on my training videos about why one should use barefoot shoes, how to acclimate to them properly. So I wanted to put together an all-encompassing guide talking about barefoot shoes. And if you're interested in anything specific, check out the description down below. I have time-stamped everything to save you time, to make this video convenient for you. But now let's dive in to the first topic, which is, what are barefoot shoes? Barefoot shoes are a type of footwear designed to replicate what it's like to move around the world barefoot, but also provide the foot with a light layer of protection. So all barefoot shoes will have pretty much two things in common. Number one, they're gonna have zero drop. So basically the heel to toe drop in pretty much every barefoot shoe is gonna be 0 millimeters. This is gonna replicate what it's like to stand and move around barefoot. The second thing that most barefoot shoes are gonna have in common are very active and maneuverable soles. So as you can see, every barefoot shoe up here has a very maneuverable sole. They bend really well, and that is designed to increase our proprioception with the ground and to just replicate that more barefoot style of movement. Now, let's talk about why you would use barefoot shoes in the first place. So when discussing the why of barefoot shoes, I think it's really important for ourselves as coaches, consumers, etc., to separate our emotional biases and preferences from this topic. So I don't think it's very productive if you're just like, oh, I just like barefoot shoes and that's why I wear them and that's the right way to go. I don't think that really answers the full question. So 3 reasons why barefoot shoes may be worth exploring for you is, number one, they can be useful tools for increasing our proprioception with the ground. So on our foot, we have millions of receptors that help us feel the ground around us. These will help our balance, these will help how we stabilize in certain movements, etc. And when we wear shoes with thicker stack heights and thicker materials, we can kind of lose out on how much we're actually feeling the ground below us. So barefoot shoes can be a nice happy medium to increase our proprioception, which may be pretty dull if we've been wearing shoes for a long time, without necessarily going full on barefoot with the ground. So if you have sensitive feet, barefoot shoes can be a nice tool for increasing that proprioception that you may be lacking if you haven't been exposing your barefoot to the ground over a long period of time. The second reason why barefoot shoes can be beneficial when worn with strategy is that they can increase some of the foot musculature that can be neglected when wearing thicker shoes. So for example, there are 29 muscles that are associated with the ankle and foot. And a lot of those muscles are intrinsic foot muscles, aka muscles that help create the 3 arches of the foot. If we're not training them to some degree or just exposing them to some natural level of resistance when it comes to supporting our body weight, even maybe external loads, we can lose out on some of their strength. So by wearing barefoot shoes, they can be a nice tool to help build up some of the foot musculature that we may have been neglecting over longer periods of time when wearing shoes. So if you're trying to build up the feet slowly or to strengthen your foot in general, barefoot shoes can be a nice tool for doing that, and you don't necessarily need to wear them all the time to reap the benefits of what they can produce with your foot musculature. The third reason why one might want to use barefoot shoes is that they'll promote what we call natural movement or a natural gait cycle. So basically, when we're walking in thicker shoes that maybe have a higher heel to toe drop, the way we move will be slightly different than if we were walking barefoot. So if you want a little bit of variance in how you're moving and just to be more cognizant of what it's like to move without a shoe and then with a shoe, barefoot shoes can be a nice tool for giving you a little bit of exposure to these different environments. I think as a human and as an athlete, it can be very beneficial to expose yourself to different environments because variance creates, I think, better longevity when it comes to our foot health and our movement. But those are 3 reasons why you might wear barefoot shoes. Now, obviously, there are more out there, and if you're a coach or if you're an athlete or if you're a big proponent of barefoot shoes, I'm sure you have your list. But those are 3 things right out of the gate that I think are pretty hard to dispute when it comes to wearing barefoot shoes. So now, how should your barefoot shoes fit? If you're a first-time buyer, this is a common question that I receive with these shoes. So what I would say is this: using a range of like 0.3 to like 0.6, 0.7 inches of clearance or length up here in the toe box should be enough. Now, what I will say is this: low profile designs that come along with barefoot shoes and wider last constructions can leave you a bit more prone to heel slip if you size up too much. So if you have a narrow or more neutral foot, I would say stay on the lower end of that range. That way the shoes can literally lock down in the midfoot, so you'll run into less heel slip issues. And then if you have a wider foot, then you may want to go for like a 1/2 inch of clearance in the toe box to ensure the shoe is comfortable for your needs. But overall, if you stay within that range, I think you should be plenty safe in your barefoot shoes in regard to sizing. So now let's answer the question, when should you wear barefoot shoes? And in reality, you can pretty much wear them for anything. But what I would say is not every activity is going to be equal in your barefoot shoes, especially if you've never trained barefoot or worn barefoot shoes. And that's why it's really important to nail your acclimation strategy to the style of footwear per the activities you plan to use them for. Now let's dive into that, because that is going to be a section that's a bit more complicated in nature, but I promise I've built out a system that will hopefully help you properly acclimate to your barefoot shoes if you've never worn them in your life. All right, so now let's talk about, I think, the beefiest topic in this whole video, and that's acclimating to barefoot shoes. I am a strong proponent of saying, hey, if you've never worn barefoot shoes, don't just go full bore into them. I think you should acclimate slowly, especially if you're not used to the impact that can come along with training with a more barefoot style approach. So how I like to conceptualize this, and hang with me throughout this section, is number one, I like to identify the activities that you're going to be doing the most and using the shoes for into 3 different categories. So we have low threshold, medium threshold, and high threshold. A low threshold activity would be just walking about your day-to-day, wearing them on a very casual basis. A medium threshold could be lifting, so doing things that are a bit more demanding in nature. And then a high threshold activity would be something like HIIT, agility work, or running, where there's going to be a lot of impact on the foot, and you're going to have to scale how you're actually displacing that force with your running style, jumping style, etc., because it will be slightly different than if you were wearing a thicker training shoe. So now once you've identified how you plan to use your barefoot shoes and you've created these buckets of activities that you want to integrate them with, next I would say explore how sensitive your feet are. If you're very comfortable being barefoot, then you're going to acclimate a lot faster than someone who has never, ever trained outside of their barefoot shoes. Their foot is likely going to need a longer timeline to acclimate and build up some of the musculature that may have been neglected or may be a little bit weak from wearing shoes. So we now have our activities, and we've identified the thresholds in which they are bucketed into, and we've now identified how sensitive our feet are from an objective analysis. Now we blend these 2 things together. So let's go through a couple of case studies here. Let's say you're somebody with very sensitive feet and you want to use your barefoot shoes for lifting and eventually HIIT and running. What I would say is this: give yourself like 2 to 3 weeks of just wearing a barefoot shoe for very casual activities like walking and just on your day-to-day basis. Do not use them for medium or high threshold activities yet. And then after the 2nd or 3rd week in which you've increased some comfort with this model, or with wearing it a couple days a week, then you can start to explore medium threshold activities. Give yourself a couple weeks there, and then start to explore high threshold activities. This will give you a longer timeline to experiment with how this type of footwear is going to change your movement and expose you to certain demands and thresholds that are going to be required of the foot's musculature and tissues at a nice, like, progressively overloaded nature. Now, let's say you're somebody who is very comfortable being barefoot and you want to use your shoes for pretty much low, medium, and high threshold activities. You want to start wearing them pretty much every single day. What I would say is this: you can probably start experimenting with your shoes with medium threshold activities right away, but I would give yourself like 2 or 3 weeks to implement those high threshold activities. Then with those high threshold activities, once you implement them, do 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. And if you notice at any point your feet are getting really fatigued, or if you notice like you're changing your movement mechanics because of fatigue, etc., or even like some discomfort, stop their usage. And now at least you know, okay, I know I can go until this point in which I start to feel discomfort. Now I'll start to work to this point again for my next session, and then scale from there. Now for our final case study, let's say you're somebody who's somewhat comfortable being barefoot and you want to use your shoes for primarily like low threshold and medium threshold activities. So you just want to wear them on a daily basis, you just want to lift in them, etc. What you can do is, I would say, give yourself 1 to 2 weeks of just wearing your shoes on a day-to-day basis, very casual basis, using only low threshold activities. Then you can most likely implement more medium threshold activities and be fine. So with all these case studies, I tried to create a system that you can conceptualize, then individualize and scale per your needs. But that doesn't mean it's just going to be a blanket case for everybody. We're all going to acclimate to more barefoot style shoes in training at our own rates. So the big thing here, and the big takeaway, is to use your discomfort and fatigue as a means of scaling. If you notice, like let's say you're in a HIIT workout and you're 20 minutes in, your feet are really fatigued, you're starting to get a little bit of discomfort, stop the usage of the barefoot shoe, swap on your normal training shoe, and then for your next session, you know how far you can usually get until you start to experience that, and then hopefully you can work and scale from there. So basically, listen to your body when you're acclimating. We're all going to acclimate at different rates, but use that system to help direct your initiatives when acclimating slowly and with strategy. All right, guys, that wraps up this barefoot shoe guide. Hopefully I was able to answer some of the questions you may have had about this style of footwear. I plan to build out another video where we talk about why you would want to wear barefoot shoes for lifting, running, etc., and go a little bit more in depth into more like the training ideology behind them. But that will come out in the future. If you have any questions on this video, hit me in the comments below. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.